As many of you have been following us, and I will start off by saying, if you've missed any of the, it sounds like self-promotion, but it's not. But if you've missed any of the messages in this series that we started all in, I would really encourage you to take some time to go back, get caught up in them. Because what we've been doing over the last few weeks is laying the foundation for, well, not only where we're headed in this series, we're laying the foundation for where we're heading as a church, where we're heading as a gathering. And I think it's very important for us to be focused on this topic of solitude and silence that we've been looking at from the very beginning. I remember, and I'll probably use this next week, but one of the times I was meeting with Kevin, was it on his dock? I know some of you don't roll your eyes when we talk about our meetings. But I wrote down a quote from Kevin, and I was going to put it up today, and I forgot. But he said that the solitude and silence, and for us getting this right in our lives, everything that we look at from here forward hinges on that. As we look at being all in, as we talk about what it means to be fully devoted, what does it mean to be fully devoted to teaching? What does it mean to be fully devoted, to be all in prayer? What does it mean to be all in community? What does it mean to be all in intimacy with our Father and Jesus and remembering Him? What does it mean to be all in radical generosity? It all stems, it finds its place. It's this solitude and silence that we are to be engaging in forms and forms, all those things. And so I really hope that as we journey through this, and again, I'm encouraged by the feedback that I'm getting. I'm encouraged by the struggles that I'm hearing. People are having a hard time with this, and that is a good thing. It is good to struggle with being quiet. It's good to struggle with finding solitude and silence. And as I talked last week, solitude and silence doesn't mean you have to always be sitting still. You can experience solitude and silence where you are open to God's voice and Him speaking to you while you're on a walk. Hunting season's coming up, and while you're in hunting season, you can experience solitude and silence. There are many ways that you can experience that personally. But the thing is, do you know where it is that God speaks to you? Where Him and Him alone has your attention. We've said this, that solitude is by definition the practice of withdrawing, pulling back from our life with others, our work, our busyness, to give God our full and undivided attention. How do you give God your full and undivided attention? We talked about how this is a sacred space, that it is a sacred space in time, that you find the time and make it repeatable, that this time it's just me and the Father. It's a sacred space physically that whether it's in your chair in front of the fireplace, whether it is going for a walk, whatever the space is, that you find that sacred space. And then we talked about the sacred space in our soul, that it is just Him and you. That there is no other noise because there is silence. And silence is this, that silence is withdrawing from our own addiction to noise, to words and activity. Silence from the noise in our heads and the ways we distract ourselves. We are desperate for this. And there's the pull to this that many of us experience, but then there's also the push that happens both internally and externally that we need to be reminded of. And we talked about this over time, and we talked about how this jar of water, it's amazing how clear this jar of pond water got. But this is our reality, right? That so many of us, our lives are this. The sediment is just swirling and swirling and swirling. The chaos, the noise, the busyness. Everything else, the social media, everything else that we experience in our lives is just spinning and spinning and spinning, and we don't have clarity. We don't see clearly. We don't hear clearly because of all the noise. And solitude and silence is about coming to the place where all the sediment, all the chaos settles. And we see clearly. And we hear clearly. And it's not easy, is it? That's what we're going to look at today. I was thinking about this week, that this is kind of like running a marathon. When you train for a marathon, you don't always just go out and run the same mileage every day. There are some days where you are just going to go and, sorry to bore you with the details, but this transfers. There are some days when you go out and you're going to run maybe 5K, but you're going to run 5K at tempo. And that means you're going at a pretty fast pace. There's some days where you're going to go out and run 10K just at a moderate pace. There's some day where you're going to go out and do this thing, and I love this, where you just go out and do fartleks. That's the thing. Everybody say it's a fun word, fartlek.
Oh dear.
And fartleks, you go and if you have a track or you time yourself, you run as fast as you can for a minute. And people, when I was doing this, the looks you would get. Because you're going down the road and you're just going for a minute, as fast as you can. And then you slow down and just go really slow for 2 minutes. And then you go really fast and you do that for 12 minutes. And you are absolutely wiped out. But it's part of the conditioning. There's these different rhythms that you experience for this long, long race that you have to run. And it's the same when I think about solitude and silence. There are days where, you set your time, and I've heard people say, I'm trying to, 10 minutes, I'm trying to get 3, I'm trying to get 5 of solitude and silence. And there are days that as you grow in this where you will have those moments where it's just, okay, I'm here, and I'm focused for this amount of time for this reason. And then today it's a little different, but it's always solitude and silence. We've been looking at Elijah and using him and his journey as a parallel for us as we think about solitude and silence in our lives. If you have your Bibles, whether it's paper or devices, turn to 1 Kings chapter 19. We're going to read verses 5 to 9. Then Elijah, he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread, baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. And we talked about this in the beginning, right? That before we can, like a big part of solitude and silence is just finding the gift of rest. And sometimes, because we are so tired, dangerous tired, teetering on dangerous tired, the most spiritual thing we can do is have a nap, so that we can be present for the time that we're going to spend with God. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. I think this is so fascinating when you stop and look at this, because what Elijah is experiencing when it comes to solitude and silence, as he is withdrawn, as he is forced out of desperation to withdraw from everything. And then in that he was so exhausted that all he could do was sleep. And God had to wake him up and feed him and then let him go back to sleep again. And I love the picture of that. I love how that speaks to us, because God's okay with us being exhausted. He's not okay with us staying in that state. But His grace meets us there. His grace empowers us there. And He brings the very things we need so that we can experience rest for our body, our mind, and our soul. But we cannot stay in that condition, because there is a journey that each one of us has to take in this silence and solitude. And again, it's different stages for different people. Like, You might be just still wrestling with finding the 10 minutes to sit and be quiet. You might be still wrestling with finding rest. How do I find rest for my mind? How do I find rest for my body? How do I find rest for my soul? You might be still experimenting with just how am I even going to do solitude and silence? Wherever you are in this process, it's okay. But please, please be putting yourself in places where, if not daily, regularly, you are putting yourself in a place to hear God, to know and be known. But at some point, we all have to face this journey into the wilderness where we have to deal with emptiness. We have to deal with facing ourselves so that we can experience the pure presence of God. And that's what we see with Elijah. That's what we see in this story. And it's so incredible to me to understand that God is waiting for us. And so often in our lives, we have to actually face the wilderness to be able to find God. We have to deal with the things in our lives. And this happens in solitude and silence. We have to actually engage the desert. I mean, we read over this pretty quickly that, first of all, I mean, I don't think Elijah really knew that he was in for this journey. I mean, he came to this tree, he left his servant behind, and I think his plan was just to stay there. And God said, no, get up and eat. You need your strength for the journey. You're like, what journey? It's a journey that Elijah had to go on. It's a journey that all of us have to go on. For Elijah to go to Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, this was the place for Israel, for the nation, that if they want, this was a sacred place for them. This is where the 10 Commandments came. This is where so much activity happened for this nation. But Elijah had to go through the wilderness to come to God, to find God, to be in the place where God could speak to him. And we read this quickly. He got up and ate, strengthened by that. He traveled 40 days and 40 nights. We read that so fast. Pause. Let that sit. 40 days, 40 nights alone in the wilderness. How many watch the Alone shows? I'm kind of addicted to them. I watched, the first one I watched, I'm like, I can't believe these people do this. They get dropped, they have a few essentials, like 10 items, and they get dropped in these forsaken places, and okay, now fend for yourself and live. And if you don't make it, we'll extract you. And I've watched people leave because they were dying. They ate something and it didn't cook it right, and it just started ravaging their bodies. I watched people who lost so much weight. I wouldn't recommend this for a dieting plan, but they lost so much weight that they couldn't move. And they were in this place for, some tap out after a few days. I watched one show where a guy went for 100 days in complete solitude. But the one thing that happens when I watch this show, and sometimes I pre-record it all, and I just start skipping through, because some of these characters are a little nuts. That's too much information, dude. I just keep flipping. But what happens to these, and this is my point, 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness, when you are all alone, and you're the only voice you hear. When you're all alone, completely separated from anything, it's amazing what starts happening in you. These people start talking about their family. You watch grown men, rugged, tough, just all of a sudden in a scene where they're on their camera just talking about, I'm realizing how bad a father I am. I'm realizing how I don't love my wife. I'm realizing how I don't love my parents. I'm realizing how And in that aloneness, in that solitude, in that time, when all the noise is gone, all of a sudden these things start coming to the surface and they're going, I have to deal with this. When I get home, I need to fix this. When I get home, I need to do this. And it's amazing what happens in this solitude. 40 days and 40 nights, Elijah moved through the desert, moved through the empty places. And I wonder, we don't have it here, but I wonder what was going through his mind. When I understand and watch these shows, and I know the same thing would happen to us, with that much solitude, with that much silence, we become very aware of the empty places in our lives. We become very aware of the things that need to be transformed, of the things that God just brings to our attention and goes, we need to deal with this, and we need to deal with that. And it's these empty places. Dan Allender, in his book, The Healing Path, says this: our spiritual journey must lead us through the desert, or else our healing will be the product of our own will and wisdom. It is in the silence of the desert that we hear our dependence on noise. It's in the poverty of the desert that we see clearly our attachments to the trinkets and the baubles that we cling to for security and pleasure. The desert shatters the soul's arrogance and leaves body and soul crying out in thirst and hunger. In the desert, we trust God or die. Through solitude and silence, we must enter the empty places of our lives if we are going to receive the healing, if we're going to receive the restoration that only God can bring. But this is so hard. What happens is when we engage these things, I watched one guy, and this was kind of mind-blowing to me. He's on a survival show. He had to kill a squirrel and eat it for food. They had to, they have to get all their food. And the fact that he took the squirrel's life, he couldn't take that problem, that hit him and he tapped out. And I'm like, but you kind of knew that going in, right? That you would have to do this. But the things happen in these empty places and if we aren't careful, if we aren't willing to stay in this for the journey, when the empty places reveal themselves, whatever they are, we'll tap out. We'll leave the solitude and silence because it's hard. But friends, hear me. Hear me. We will not experience God's best for us if we don't enter the empty places, if we don't enter the deserts, if we don't sit in solitude and silence long enough for God to begin to deal with us, to meet us in the empty places of hurt that we've caused or hurt that we've received, in the empty places of loneliness, in the empty places of brokenness, in the empty places of failed or empty relationships, in the empty places of failure, in the empty places of striving and seeking for identity, for our validation, for our security from others and the world instead of God. And friends, if we have to engage the wilderness, we have to engage the wilderness. We have to engage the emptiness, or it will grow and it will devour. I've seen this time and time again. When it seems that they start experiencing incredible things from God and they get into these places and it gets so hard and they just run away and the problem is never dealt with. And guess what? The problem doesn't get smaller. The emptiness doesn't go away. It just gets bigger. And then takes its toll. I watch this happen in people's lives where in their 40s, their 50s, their 30s, it starts in their 30s usually, and then in their 40s and 50s, the stuff that can get revealed, They won't bring it to God. They won't get silent with God. They won't get in a place where they hear His voice, receive what He has for them. And because they won't, the problem doesn't go away. And then I watch people's stories, and then look what happened in their 40s, look what happens in their 50s, and their 60s, and etc. And it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the damage it does to them and to others. And usually, and not usually, always, if God doesn't intervene, their calling is gone. Their purpose is not fulfilled. If Elijah's story tells us anything, it is that solitude and silence offers no quick fixes. Emptiness of the desert for 40 days, 40 nights, and God has still not made Himself known. 40 days, 40 nights He's in the wilderness. And God still hasn't made Himself known. He gets to Mount Horeb, and, but He gets to Mount Horeb, and He is what? Just spends the night in the cave. But this is the journey that we have to face. Henry Nouwen says that solitude is the furnace of transformation. It is the place of the great struggle, the great encounter. The struggle against the compulsions of the false self, and the encounter with the loving God who offers Himself as the substance of the new self. Transformation takes its time. It takes patience. It takes perseverance. And seems to move, so slow sometimes. We have to wait. How many like waiting? How many love sitting in the queue for customer service? Right? I mean, we've been having just horrific internet problems that just keep going and going and going. And I'm like, here I go again. I gotta go. I've gotten so where just to maintain some integrity, I don't phone. I do the live chat because then they don't hear how angry I am in my voice. But it's been frustration after frustration after frustration, and then you enter the queue for customer service, right? And there are 20 people ahead of you. Oh, good. I have to wait. To have the problem fixed, I have to wait. I have to sit here. I have to persevere through. I have to be patient in this. You are now number 18. Okay, 40 minutes later. Hour later, you are now number 7. And there's so much temptation to say, forget this. Shut it down and walk away. Does the problem go away? No. It actually, I did that and our internet got worse. But this is our tension. This is what happens in the empty places. We don't like to wait. We don't like to sit and wait for God to bring the answers. This is where, and Kelly did not read my notes, this is where Isaiah 40, 30 to 31 comes in. Though youths grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength, will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. So often I've heard this verse taken, out of context, where it's like, if you don't know what to do, just wait on God. Sounds so spiritual. Because you have to wait because God's got to catch up to you. Right? You're going so fast, you've got things going so good that you wait here so God catches up to you so that you know what you're supposed to do. That's not what this is talking about. Israel was in the darkest moments of their history as a nation. The prophet Isaiah comes and says, you guys are messed, and it's going to get hard, and you're going to go. You talk about a wilderness, 40 days, 40 nights. You guys are in for it, and it's a long haul. And then all of a sudden, in this prophet's message to Israel, the hope comes. And he speaks and he says, but wait. Because of all the problems, because of all the pressures, because of everything that's going on, all the turmoil, all the craziness that's happening, you're going to be tempted to run. You're going to be tempted to tap out. You're going to be tempted to say, God, I can't wait anymore. That's when you have to wait. You wait. Not when you're wondering what to do. Not with this mindset, okay, God, I'm just sitting here passively waiting. No, this is a waiting when you are tempted to run, when you are tempted to give up. Wait. Wait. This is an active waiting, not a passive waiting. This is something that requires you to say, okay, everything in me wants to run because I don't want to deal with this, but I'll wait. I'll wait to gain new strength. I will wait to rise up. I will wait so that God reveals himself. This is what we have to do when we enter the empty places. We wait until God shows up. Sooner or later, God will make himself known. And that is what he did for Elijah. When he did show up, though, he brought a question. And the word of the Lord came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? That's a great question. How many know that when God asks a question, it's because he doesn't know the answer? He doesn't. It's for us. And I love this question. Here is Elijah. He's gone 40 days and 40 nights. The empty places. Who knows what was going on in his mind? Who knows what was going on in the darkness that he saw, the things that were not all bad, but some things were good, but in this, the empty places, and he's going, God shows up and says, what are you doing here? That's a great question for us. It's a great question I'm going to ask you to engage in this week. What are you doing here? Why did you come to me? What are you looking for? Are you looking for the things that I think you should be looking for? And God just simply says, Elijah, what are you doing here? And in this moment, Elijah, he's gone through the empty places and now he has to face himself. And there will come a time in solitude and silence where, yeah, we go through the empty places and then we have to face ourselves. We have to look at ourselves and really pay attention to what's going on. Look at what Elijah said. He said, I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. In this moment, you had Elijah as he faces himself, and you see the good, you see the bad, and you see the ugly. The good is that Elijah could see and name the presence of God. Elijah could, if he took the time, he was like, yeah, God, I know who you are. I've seen what you've done. I know that we are good. He could name, he could speak to the presence of God. The bad, Israel had turned from God. And that is bad. That was horrible. And for Elijah, it's like, my whole calling, my whole purpose in life was to keep this nation hearing you. And it's not happening. The ugly, Elijah had lost his perspective. I am the only one left. The pity party. He was so focused on all the negative. He was so focused on all the problems that he lost sight of everything that was around him. And that's what happens if we, in this place, if we don't get to the place where things become clear and all we do is focus on what's going on in our lives and the turmoil and all that stuff, then we can't see clearly what's actually happening in us and around us. And we too will lose our perspective. This willingness to see ourselves as we are and to say honestly to God and speak honestly to God about where our heart is in the journey is part of solitude and silence, but it takes time. We have to know what it means to rest in God's love and grace. Know what it means to come before Him as we are, like we talked about last week. It takes time to know that as we come before God, that this is a safe place. We are so used to feeling shame and condemnation in the unfinished parts of our souls that we hesitate to be open. We hesitate to be honest. We hesitate to be vulnerable in the presence of God. Because we've all experienced it. We've experienced the shame. We've experienced the condemnation from the world, even families sometimes, and the church. Because that's what religion does. But in relationship, in intimate relationship, in solitude and silence, where you know and are known, where it's you and the Father, we come to know and receive God's grace. We come to know and receive His love. And when we face ourselves for who we really are and how we're really doing, then we can be honest because it's a safe place. God then speaks to Elijah. The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." And so many of us are familiar with this story. The great and powerful wind, then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. For those of us who have heard this story so often, you can sit there and go, okay, I get it. I've been told this time and time again, that as Elijah walked to the face of this mountain, as he stood there, God was not revealing Himself in the areas where Elijah himself thought God would be. Because Elijah has seen God move in the power. Elijah had seen God move in miraculous, powerful ways. The fire coming down from heaven. You know, I'm sure that day on Mount Carmel when the altar blew up, I'm sure there was earthquakes. I'm sure that it was just an incredible display of power. But God didn't show up in that. And Scripture doesn't say this, but I think about this. I'm like, so often if we aren't in a place of solitude and silence, we will get so distracted. We will lose perspective. And then we start looking for God in all the places where God isn't. And we expect Him to show up. Okay, God, I am in this mess. Can you see what's happening in my life? All this turmoil, all this stuff going around. And so, God, I run to find the big experience of You. Not there. So I'm going to run here. Not there. God, surely You'll show up in that. Not there. Not saying He can't. Not saying He won't. Sometimes, maybe. But where was He? In the gentle whisper. And if all you're focusing on is the significant, if all you're focusing on is this out here, you're going to miss God. You're going to miss what He has. And we are so conditioned, and I watch us as Christians in North American culture, we get locked into the spectacular. And yeah, God, I'm not saying He doesn't. But I think He moves most and always in the quiet. If we put ourselves in the place where we say, God, this is who I am. As Elijah, here's the good, here's the bad, here's the ugly. And I love how Elijah, when God said, Elijah, come to the mountain, up to the mountain, I'm going to pass by. He said, come as you are. He didn't say, you go fix that. You go get you've lost perspective. You have this pity party going on. You're missing it. Get that fixed up and then come, we'll talk. No. Elijah, the good, the bad, the ugly, come here. I'm about to pass by. And as you sit here today, if it's true, and I believe it is, without solitude and silence, we will experience the chaos. We will experience the turmoil. We will experience the storms in ways that we can't function. Internally and externally. And will we put ourselves in the place to hear from God? We are so torn, so pulled by everything that's going on, everything that's happening in our lives, that leads us to being frantic, that leads us to a dangerous tide. And when it comes to facing yourself, as I was writing about this week, I was reminded of this part of my own journey, and it's still ongoing. Oh, it is still ongoing. Where facing myself meant dealing with some pretty hard questions that in the emptiness God started bringing to me. I'm going to share some of these questions and see if you can relate. Who am I if I'm not busy doing things that tell the world who I am? Why can't I stop the insanity even when I know it's hurting me and others? If I'm not busy, am I really worth anything? Do I have any value? What do I do with the pain, the sadness, and my own brokenness? What is true and real in my relationship with God? Is God really enough to satisfy loneliness, emptiness, belonging in my soul? These are questions that came to me in the emptiness as I went through the desert and still go through the desert. In solitude and silence, I don't like how these questions revealed so much about me. Revealed how, although I had a sincere desire to serve God, there was this unhealthy driving force to prove myself to people that resulted in my drivenness and constant overcommitment. This quote from Ruth Barton's book hit me hard when I read it. It takes every bit of strength we have gained in the resting to stand firm in the midst of the storm that is created by these first glimpses of ourselves as we really are. Friends, this is not a one-time event. As we grow in solitude and silence, as we experience this, we come to this place where, and in these moments, this isn't like one day and it's done. In solitude and silence, you will experience the emptiness, and you sit with God in that. And when the time is up, you just say, "Thank you, God. I know that we aren't finished." And you leave and go out about your day in the presence of God. And then you come back and you begin to continue through that. And it goes on and on and on. And then when you're done with one empty place, God brings another empty place in time and in His grace and in His power. And it just is one invitation over another after another. But we have to make the choice to accept the invitation. Another quote from Henry Nouwen. Solitude is not a private therapeutic place. Rather, it is the place of conversion. The place where the old self dies and the new self is born. In solitude, I get rid of my scaffolding. No friends to talk with. No telephone calls to make. No meetings to attend. No music to entertain. No books to distract. Just me, naked, vulnerable, weak, sinful, deprived, broken, nothing. It is this nothingness that I have to face in my solitude. Nothingness so dreadful that everything in me wants to run to my friends, my work, my distractions, so that I can forget my nothingness and make myself believe that I'm worth something. I try to run from the dark abyss of my nothingness and restore my false self in all its vainglory. The task is to preserve in my solitude, to stay in my cell, and all my seductive visitors get tired, until all my seductive visitors get tired of pounding on my door and leave me alone. The struggle is real because the danger is real. It is the danger of living the whole life as one long defense against the reality of our condition. Thankfully, solitude and silence, as you sit there today, and I realize this on Thanksgiving Sunday, I am speaking to you in a way that just kind of causes you to go, "Oh my goodness, I have to walk through this, I have to walk through this, I have to walk through this." But hear me when I say there is much to be thankful for in engaging this journey, because God is at work. He loves you so much that He can't leave you as you are. but we have to pause. We have to sit. I think sometimes in solitude and silence too, we need to remember that the emptiness isn't always heavy. Sometimes it's as simple as God saying, "You haven't been very nice to people lately." That happens to me a lot. Not a lot. It used to happen a lot. I think it's getting better. But in solitude and silence, one of the things that we have to do as we engage is do this practicing, is sitting and going, "God, 2 questions. Where did I miss your presence yesterday? But where did I experience your presence yesterday? Where is there sin in my life?" And in those moments, God, for me, He says, "Well, remember when you met that person at the grocery store and the look on your face said nothing about anything good and the tone from your voice? You didn't really practice my presence at that moment." And sometimes it means I have to go and say, "I'm sorry to people." But this is part of the emptiness. It's not always really heavy. Sometimes it's pretty simple. When Elijah heard it, he put his cloak over his face, a sign of complete reverence and respect, and went out and stood in the mouth of the cave. He just stood in God's presence. The good, the bad, the ugly. In his brokenness, the good, the bad, and the ugly met God in silence. And honestly, friends, I don't know anything better. I personally don't know anything better than just facing myself as I am and coming into God's presence. The good, the bad, the ugly. And allowing Him to speak. Coming into His presence, Isaiah 40, and waiting so that I can get strength. Waiting so that I can rise up. Waiting so that I can once again engage the day. Psalm 46:10, "Be still and know that I am God." In the waiting, the knowing will come. As I close today, I want to read these statements from Ruth Barton's book. This is the most important kind of knowing in the human experience, and it comes only as we are quiet enough to let the faithful presence of God hold us in our brokenness, until our brokenness is healed by love. All other kinds of knowing merely set the stage for this. As painful as it is, the process of seeing ourselves as we are and allowing God to do His work in the place that needs it most is full of grace. It offers the opportunity to break out of patterns of thinking and believing which distort our reality, condition our responses to others, and prevent us from living as a free self in God. It offers us the opportunity to give ourselves over to the one who loves us as we are, and yet loves us too much to let us stay as we are. This love does not lose track of us no matter what dark places we must walk into. It is a love deeper than any abyss that we might fall into. It is a love with the power to heal any brokenness we might encounter. This love eventually becomes a bedrock of settledness at the core of our being. It is worth any price we have to pay to find it. God's love is so amazing. We celebrate it. We remember it. We're thankful for His love. And in solitude and silence, as we face the empty places, as we face ourselves and begin to experience the pure presence of God, like Elijah did, we encounter a love that's so powerful. I want you to just now, for a moment, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. I'm asking you to close your eyes to turn out distractions. I'm asking you to just take a couple of deep breaths. As you breathe in, just think about breathing in all God has for you. Receiving His love. Breathe in His grace. Breathe in His forgiveness. Breathe in all that He has for you. And recognize that as you breathe in and receive all those things, you have to exhale at some point. And so you breathe out His love, His grace to those around you. I want you to just in this moment take another deep breath and think about the empty places in your life. Think about the journey that we all must go on into a wilderness where we see the empty places, where we have to face ourselves, where some hard questions might come. But God's waiting on the other side of that. What are those places for you? Can you name one? Can you come to God in this moment with the good, with the bad, with the ugly, and just know that He receives you? And if you wait, He will come. He will make Himself known.
In the secret, in the quiet place, in the stillness you are there. In the secret, in the quiet hours, I'm only for you, 'cause I want to know you more. I want to know you. I want to hear your voice. I want to know you more. I want to touch you. I want to see your face. I want to know you more. In the secret, in the quiet place, in the stillness, you are there. In the secret, in the quiet